Okay, and we are live. I believe there are actually already a couple of people here, which is awesome. We're at 5:30, so I am gonna get ready to rock and roll very shortly. Might give us a little bit of time, just in case there's a few people jumping on. Not right on the dot of 5:30, but for those of you who are already joining, I'm so excited that you are hopping on here so we can talk about Youth Fair. So hang out just a few moments here, and then we will jump right into things because we have a lot to talk about. Okay, I will go ahead and just point out if you've not used YouTube Live before, which I've not actually ever used it as a platform. I've been a part of other people's hosting YouTube Live. But there is a chat box here. That's how we're going to communicate this evening. And so for me, in my view, it's over on the right-hand side of the screen. And so hopefully that's going to look very similar to you. If you're on a mobile device, on your phone or whatnot, it's going to be down below, typically the video. And so feel free to utilize that today as we're going over these rules, these categories, the amendments. Utilize that. Shoot me any questions you have or anything you want clarification on. Let's utilize that so that we can have some good discussion about Youth Fair and get your questions answered. Okay. Got a few more joining in. That's awesome. So we'll get started really soon, you guys. I'm just giving a little bit of time for people to kind of trickle in and hop on here. Awesome. Okay, well, we're already a few minutes past 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. If anyone's wondering, this is going to be available to go back and watch later. And so you'll find it on our YouTube channel, and which is where we're at right now. So if you need to go back and hear anything we talk about, or maybe you've got to miss something, that's okay. It's going to be here. So know that. Also, feel free to share this afterwards if you're, in your 4-H club or with your FFA students or FCCLA kiddos, whomever. Feel free to share this video once it's done being recorded and utilize it as a resource. Okay. So once again, just a reminder, feel free to use that chat box. I'm going to be watching that to hear from you guys, any questions you have while we're going through all of this. Okay, so thank you for joining. I'm excited about this. I look forward to the Youth Fair every year, and I might ought to start by introducing myself. So if you have not gotten to meet me yet, and I haven't gotten to meet you, my name is Keely McCrady. I'm the Family and Community Health Agent in Johnson County for AgriLife Extension, and I am the co-superintendent for the Johnson County Youth Fair. I get to work with our superintendent, Jill House, who's super amazing, and also we have a whole committee of wonderful people who work together to make the Youth Fair happen every year, along with our JCLAA board as well. So big shout out to them. And this year we've gone through and we have made some amendments to the rules and how things are going to work with the youth fair this year a little bit. So if this is your first year for youth fair, that's fine. But if you're someone who's done it before and participated in it before, just know that it might look a little bit different, and that's okay. Most of those changes are due to some health and safety concerns that we've really tried to take into account here, not just for you guys who are participating, but also for our judges and our volunteers who are a part of putting on that youth fair contest every year. And so we've just tried to make sure that this is, we wanted the youth fair to be able to happen, obviously. And so we were willing to make a few adjustments to make sure that it could happen in a way that was safe for everybody and that we could feel comfortable having a lot of participants, because we want that participation level to be high. We want everyone to get this awesome experience. So that is kind of our goal this year, is to make these changes to help things go smoothly and safely. So let's talk about, we're going to start off by talking about some of these amendments. And I am going to be I'm going to let you take a peek at my notes, but this is our 2021 Youth Fair Rule Amendments, okay? And this is available on the JCLAA website. That's the Johnson County Livestock Association. Okay, and it's their website, jclaa.net. Okay, and that's where you can find these. You can go read them yourself, copy off a set if you want to reference. They're available there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we made some amendments, and they are listed separately from the rules and guidelines. Okay, and so first thing I want to point out in these amendments is location. So typically, the Johnson County Livestock Show takes place out at the Johnson County Sheriff's Posse grounds. And there's a building out there where the youth fair usually happens in conjunction with the county show. We're still going to be at that same building. We call it the White Building out at the Posse grounds, but we're adding a second location this year, okay, to the youth fair, and we're dividing it up, which is just sounds crazy maybe, but we're going to divide it up and have it at a second location as well. And that is just to help spread out our judges, and allow us to set things up in a way that's just much safer health-wise. And so let's talk about what's happening at what location and when. So location number 1 is the White Building on the Sheriff Posse grounds, and that is located at 1315 South Main Street, okay, in Cleburne, per our usual traditional youth fair, okay? And so you'll see in this list of rule amendments the categories that are going to be at that location. It's going to be all of our edible food categories. So that's candies, canned goods, cookies, cakes, breads, and pies are all going to be dropped off there. That is where you will turn in your entries for those categories, is at the White Building, okay? Location number 2 is going to be actually here at our office, okay, the extension office. And it's going to be, we have a large room where we'll accommodate all of these entries and have check-in, just like we would at the Posse grounds typically, okay? And so all of our non-edible entries are going to come here at the extension office. So that's arts, crafts, creative stitchery, clothing, photography, and decorated cakes is included, because we've never tasted decorated cakes. It's not typically what we would consider an edible entry. So it's going to stay here at the office with our non-edible entries, okay? And so our office is located, and you can look this up in Google. You should be able to find us. You can always give us a call if you're not sure where we're located. But we are at 109 West Chambers Street in Cleburne. Okay, we are literally down the street from the sheriff's posse. So 2 separate locations. We have edible foods going to one location at the posse ground, and our non-edible categories coming here at the extension office. Okay, there will be check-in set up for both. So if you have, let's say, for example, an edible entry like candy, and you have also entered photography, you just, whichever one comes first, drop off at one location and then come drop off at the other location, your entries appropriately. Okay. This is, it's going to be different, but we really think this is going to help cut down on some risks this way and overall make things just easier for us in this 2021 year of pandemic situation. Okay. So the main thing is knowing what to drop off at what location there. So make sure you take note of this document, the Youth Fair rule amendments, so that you can get to the right place with the right items. Okay. And if you show up at the one place and you've got the wrong, entry there, we'll redirect you. We're prepared already to do a little redirecting because we understand that might be the case. And then that might happen. A little confusion might happen, but we're trying to be preemptive and provide those details so that you can get where you need to be with the right entry. Okay. So on the same note, looking at our rule amendments document, there's a couple of notes in there about some safety precautions. So one thing, the first thing you'll notice actually under the rule amendments is that it says the Youth Fair Grand and Reserve Champion items that advance to the auction will be considered a premium sale for the year 2021. So items will not be given to buyers. Okay. We have just made this decision for 2021. This is something that we are, going to discuss going back to once we're out of this pandemic situation. But this year, if your item places, Grand Reserve and is going to auction, you can still sell it. It just means that you're not going to go and physically give that item to your buyer. Okay. You'll get to keep it or whatnot, and it will be a premium sale, just like the livestock entries actually, and competitors and winners. Okay. The other note you'll find under there is that masks are going to be required while in either of those building locations for drop off and pickup. Okay. So just be prepared, have a mask on hand, be prepared to put that on to come inside and take care of your youth fair business and have that on hand. Okay. That's pretty standard pandemic safety precaution. Okay. So those are just 2 kind of safety precautions we have listed in there. So just make note of those. Any questions so far over any of that? And if I'm moving too fast through something, flag me down, type it up, be like, whoa, wait a minute, I have a question about that. Okay, we'll stop and we'll talk about it. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about our dates and our times, okay, for the youth fair. So looking at our calendars, we're in the first week of January. Drop off. So the time for submitting your entry is going to be Monday, January the 4th, from 2 to 8 p.m. That is your drop-off window. Please note that if for some reason you can't get there with your item, you can have somebody else come drop it off for you. They just need to know your name and they need to be prepared to fill out your priority card for the auction. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so Monday, January 4th, 2 to 8 p.m. drop-off time. Fast forward to Tuesday, January 5th, that's when the judging is going to take place, okay? And then results are going to be posted on Wednesday, January 6th, as early as 8 a.m. Okay, and so for our non-edible entries, that's arts, craft, creative stitchery, clothing, photography, decorated cakes, everything that's here at the extension office, pick up for those items, when you can come and pick those back up, is going to be Wednesday, January 6th from 8 to 1, so 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., okay, that morning through 1 p.m. that afternoon, okay? For our edible items, candies, canned goods, cookies, cakes, breads, pies, those items are all going to be discarded after judging, okay? That's one reason we moved decorated cakes over to the non-edible category, is because we really hate to trash a cake that somebody just spent hours and hours decorating. But and that's not going to get cut into or really handled in any way. That other food is going to get handled by judges, okay? And so that's why we're going to discard it after judging. You've got the recipe, you can make some more, right? So you're not going to have to pick up your food items, but you're still going to need to come and pick up your feedback cards, okay? Because judges are still going to be making comments on all of those items, all of those entries. And so we will have ribbons and feedback cards at the Posse location. So those entries at the Posse location. So pickup for that's also going to be Wednesday, January 6th, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay. So just make note of those times, know those ahead of time. We always have a little bit of confusion happen over when and where all of that's happening. So Monday is drop off. Tuesday is judging. You don't have to do anything for that. Don't even show up. Wednesday, come back, find out your results, and pick up either your item or your feedback card, your comment cards, and any ribbons that you hopefully earned and won, okay? So those are the dates, those are the times, those are included on that Youth Fair Rule Amendments document, okay? So if you need that in print, it's available there for you. So mark that on your calendars. Few other things to note in those amendments, specifically under the edible entry, is that there is, we're going to be judging those entries. Our judges will judge those entries same as usual per those guidelines that are posted on the JCLAA website, okay? We're going to look at those here in just a minute. But items will not be tasted this year. We had a lot of discussion about this as a committee. We've got good reasons for that. We feel that there's still a lot of other things we can look at, our judges can look at to judge those entries by. So just know that that is going to be the case, okay? It's going to be judged, just not going to be judged specifically on taste, okay? Once again, that's something we hope can change back to normal in the following years. And then also, for canned goods, specifically, you only need to submit one can this year. Typically in the past, we've had you submit two cans, and this year we only need one. That's just not something they really are going to have to open up and whatnot this year. So we're just going to do the one can, okay? Make note of that. If that's a category you're looking at entering, that's another amendment, okay? All the things we just talked about are in this amendment document, so just make note of that. All right. Any questions so far? Okay, if you do have anything, type it up, shoot it into the chat, and we'll talk about it. We're going to move on to our rules and guidelines, starting with some of our general rules. Now, this is the 2020 rule set, so those rules and amendments are not in here. So there are a couple of rules that are going to be affected by those amendments, so we'll talk a little bit about those as we go along. Just know that entries are subject to the Johnson County, livestock show and youth fair general rules and regulations, and to the special rules in that section. So where special rules conflict with other rules, those special rules are going to prevail, okay? And so that just, keep note of that and keep that in mind as you read through the rules for youth fair. We have 2 age divisions for youth fair, and that's juniors, which are ages 13 and younger, and seniors are ages 14 and older, and that's as of your age of the day of the show. Okay, so a lot of times, like in 4-H, we have our kiddos typically divided up into junior, intermediate, and senior age divisions. But youth fair is junior, 13 and younger, seniors, 14 and up. So make sure you know your age division when you're submitting your entry for the youth fair, okay? And think of what age you're going to be at the time of the show, not what age you are now upon entry, okay? You can enter 1 entry per division or category, but you can enter more than 1 category, more than 1 division. So non-food items must not have been previously shown in the Johnson County Youth Fair. That's things like art, clothing, crafts. If you've submitted it before, don't resubmit it again. We do remember things, and every once in a while we'll see a repeat. So that's not cool. That doesn't happen very often, but just, we want it to be original and not something that's been submitted previously. Another thing, no substitutions will be allowed. This is rule number 5. Exhibitor must compete with the item that was listed on their entry form. So if you mark down, you entered cakes, cookies, and candies, and you show up on the day of the youth fair entry, check-in with cake, cookies, and a pie, we're not going to have you down as having entered a pie. We're going to have you down as having entered candy. And you can't just enter, your pie in place of your candy, okay? So keep track of what you enter, because if you're entering now or in the next month and January rolls around, you might not remember what exactly you've just entered off the top of your head. So make sure you keep a copy of that or make a note somewhere of what you enter so that you don't get yourself in a bind come check-in day when you've got the wrong item that you worked hard to make and then can't enter. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Keep track of that over these next couple of months. Okay. Rule number 6 says that all entries must be the work of the exhibitor. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not even really going to spend time on that. Rule number 7 says any entry not conforming to the stated rules will be disqualified. And we do have disqualifications nearly every year. We have really minimized that a lot in the past years by trying to make sure that our rules are clear and well explained. We don't like disqualifying items. We do that though when it, becomes an unfair situation for exhibitors. So Make sure that you read through these rules thoroughly. Obviously, you're here trying to learn already, which is great. So, we don't want to disqualify you. So just make sure that you've gone over the rules for your categories that you're entering and know those really well so that you can enter items that are appropriate to that. Okay. Moving on. Number 9, exhibitor name must not be on entries, recipes, or instructions. Keep in mind, art is where we probably run into that the most in categories. So just remember that rule is in there for a reason. We want to keep things fair and anonymous for our judges. Rule number 10, okay, this is talking about the auction. So all grand and reserve grand champions will be sold in the auction on Saturday of that same week in January, which remember is going to be a premium sale. And that's going to be with the exception of 2 categories, and that's decorated cakes and clothing. They will receive prize money instead. Okay, they don't go to auction. As an exhibitor, you can only sell 1 youth fair item in an auction. So if you place high with more than 1 item, you're only going to get to sell 1 of those. So the item, the way that gets chosen is you will have submitted a priority card ahead of time at check-in, and we're going to go back and we're going to pull your card, and we're going to see which item which entry you prioritized for the sale ahead of time. And that's what we're going to, designate as your sale item, is your higher prioritized item, okay? So it's important when you're marking that priority card that you put some thought into what you want to sell, rank how you rank those items. Because if you do have multiple things qualify for sale, that's how that's going to be determined, which one you get to sell. Yes, okay. All youth fair entries, speaking of the sale, must be small enough that the exhibitor can carry that entry through the auction ring without assistance. This is typically, we run into problems here a lot of times with our art and crafts category, especially craft. So pay attention to that as you're selecting what to make, that you can carry it and handle that in the sale ring, because that is a part of the rules there, okay? Keep that in mind. Yes. So that rule number 12 is just saying there's really no changes that can be made after you've entered your item, for the sale. It needs to be just as you entered it. Okay, and you're not required to bring the baked goods entered for judging through the auction ring. That's not required. We'll have signs typically that say what you made on them to hold that day at the sale, so that, people will know what you made and can see what they're bidding on, so to speak. So no need to bring those on that day. And that's kind of looking ahead in advance, but we're going over these now just because it is something to be considered. Okay, rule number 13, it talks about the youth fair not being a premium sale, but remember this year we have that amendment, so keep that in mind when you're looking at rule number 13. That is not the case this year. Okay, you're not going to have to contact the buyer to make arrangements to get your baked good to them after the auction or anything like that. You're still going to need to write thank you notes, okay, and send those to your buyers here. But it's a premium sale. You're not going to be making any deliveries, okay? So keep that in mind when you're reading rule number 13. Now, rule number 14, all Grand and Reserve Champion recipes will be retained and included in the Youth Fair Book of Champions. And that is given to our Youth Fair judges every year, which is awesome. They love it. They get to take those home and have that kind of as their keepsake. And it's sort of our thank you gift to the judges who volunteer their time to come and judge at the youth fair. So, and that's kind of a part of why we organize the recipes like we do each year. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just that's a fun fact. And I can show you what that kind of looks like. Is actually, they're these really neat books, and they have all of the recipes from the previous year included in them. So it's a neat little keepsake that we make for the judges, and they really love getting those every year. So rule number 15 is talking about where the youth fair is going to take place and what times and whatnot. Keep in mind, that's another rule that amendments have been made to. So double check the information in the rule amendments for that one, okay? There we go. Those are our general rules. So let's talk about baked goods. Because in our rules and guidelines, that's our next section is rules that apply to all baked goods. And this is going to be our candies, our cookies, our cakes, our breads, and our pies. So rule number 1 right away is that all entries must be accompanied with the recipe at the time of check-in. This one is one that I know gets tricky. People forget this one a lot. They show up, they don't have their recipe. It makes things stressful. So try and just make sure you've got that printed out ahead of time, ready to go in your car as you're coming to check in, so that when you get there, you have it ready to hand to us, and we can put it with your entry and get you checked in. Now, there are some specific requirements because the name of the game for youth fair is trying to make things as even and fair for exhibitors as possible, and also make it as easy for our judges to do a good job of judging objectively rather than subjectively as well. And so those recipes must be typed in black ink on one side of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of plain white paper. Okay, no clip art, no pictures, no pretty colored ink, any kind of borders or anything like that. Just black and white, black ink on a white background. That's all we want, okay? So that is kind of our layout for our recipes. But then you also need to make sure you include your recipe name, all of the ingredients, including any kind of garnishes, and of course the instructions on how it's actually, made and prepared. You don't need to put your name. And don't have that recipe pre-attached to your entry. We will get that attached in a certain way so that we can go through later and pull them to have for our Book of Champions. So just make sure you've got that one single sheet, one side, not double-sided, all on one side. And every year I hear people say, that is so hard. My recipe is so long, and I understand that. So don't be afraid to get a little creative when you're, typing up your recipe. Here's some examples of what some different recipes look like, okay? So this is a pie recipe, and I know you cannot read this really, but I just wanted you to see, and this is really small font. This has been shrunk down a little bit for the book formatting purposes, but this is the whole recipe. It fits on one page. It includes the pie crust recipe. Okay, you've got their ingredients and the instructions for making the crust, and the pie filling and the instructions for making that filling, okay, and the whole pie. A lot of people, sometimes I say a lot, every once in a while, someone will enter a pie and forget to include not just how to make the pie and the pie filling, but their crust recipe as well. And we need to see that you've made it all in your recipe. So make sure that you include that on that page. Another one, this one has quite a lot going on. I think this is another pie recipe. Those are some of our longest recipes typically. So they have filling recipes listed filling ingredients listed over here, pie crust ingredients over here, okay, utilizing all of their space. And then they have crust instructions down below, and then their, overall pie instructions as well. So if you have to, use your smallest margin setting, you can shrink your font down a little bit, try and keep it legible for our judges, because they are going to look at your recipe when they're judging. They take that into account. How difficult was it to make? And the recipe is the best way for them to really get a good grasp of that sometimes. So just keep that in mind. Here's another one. This is a cake recipe, and it has a lot going on. There's a ton of ingredients. These are all the ingredients and then all of the instructions. So still looks pretty neat. They utilized their spacing really well. So one page, black and white ink, black ink on a white page. Okay. All right. So following that, we have all baked goods must be made from scratch completely. Don't use cake mixes, anything like that, any kind of base, pie crusts, you've got to make from scratch as well, okay? So pay attention to that rule. Also, rule number 3 there says that judges will taste all entries, therefore food safety is critical. We know from our amendments that's not the case this year. However, once again, we're trying to get that rule changed back in the future to where tasting can be resumed. And so we typically really emphasize food safety. And we're going to continue that this year because, in the hopes that once we do continue it again in the future, no one will be out of practice and no one will be confused about what they can and cannot include for their food to be safe for judges to taste. So rule number 4 is following ingredients and items that will not be allowed. This is still going to be the case for 2021. Okay, rule number 4 is still to be followed. And so that includes cake mixes or other packaged baking mixes, such as pancake mix or cake powder, okay? Also, prepared pie crusts or any other kind of prepared dough. If you're baking cinnamon rolls, can't do it out of a can, obviously, but you get the gist, okay? Also, items requiring refrigeration. And the list below is not a complete listing, but we are trying to give you the best idea that we can of things that are not, room temperature, multiple hours, food safe. So that's going to include cream cheese, Cool Whip or whipped cream toppings or fillings. Okay. Meringue, not safe. Cream pies, custard pies, buttermilk pies, chess pies, curd pies, sweet potato pies, pumpkin pies. Those are all similar types of pies, okay? Your recipe might not say chess pie, chocolate chess pie. It might be chocolate delight pie. But, it might include those same components as a chess pie and not be safe for consumption, unless refrigerated. So keep that in mind. That's why we say it's not a complete list, because we can't name every single kind of pie that might be of those types. Okay, so just really consider that when you're choosing your recipe. Some good examples are going to be, things like fruit pies or nut pies. Things of those natures are of that nature are typically pretty safe to stick with. Okay. Eggs that have not been cooked and eggs in items left out overnight before being cooked. There are some recipes where it will say, make this ahead of time, include eggs, and leave it overnight on your counter, and then finish making it the next day. Okay, we're going to consider that as not a food safe item. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. And eggs that have not been cooked, just look at your recipe, make sure that it doesn't include any of that. Also, fresh fruit as a garnish, okay? You can cook fruit into baked goods, but fresh fruit, we don't want to see it. It's not food safe, sitting out at room temperature for extended periods of time. And it also it's not going to look pretty after an extended period of time either. So just choose another garnish, okay? Please. Moving on to rule number 5. Before we do that, any questions over food safety or any of those types of ingredients? Okay, we'll move on. We're going to talk about containers. Once again, keep in mind, you're like, why are there so many rules? We're trying to keep things as even and fair and unbiased as possible. And containers our rules for containers is really what this is about, okay? And also at this point too, with discarding those food items, we don't want to be having to keep up with your, nice bakeware, okay, your special dish that grandmom gave you or whatnot. We want to have items that we can just throw things away safely and not have issue there. So let's talk about containers and what's acceptable. All baked goods must be covered with a non-colored clear material. Okay, plastic wrap, press and seal, those are non-colored clear materials that you can fully use there. And it must be in a disposable container. Inexpensive hard plastic or metal containers are not considered disposable. No glass containers allowed. I have a few examples for us, okay? Here are some things that are not good. So, for example, any kind of Tupperware, and this is what I would call a hard plastic, okay? This is not what we would typically consider disposable. I would take this home, I would wash it out, I would reuse it, right? If it's microwave safe, probably not what we're talking about for good containers. So this kind of Tupperware is not what we want to see. Don't use that. Okay. Also, talking about, we go on and talk about containers that are colored or decorative. So anything, that's like this is a red container. Obviously, it's already kind of not the right plastic and it's not really disposable. But anything like this, where it's colored, or sometimes you'll have foil containers that have, seasonal prints on them or colors. Anything like that needs to be covered with like foil so that it looks plain. So that the judges aren't looking at it, they're judging your food item, okay? So these are not what we're talking about. Also, excuse me one moment, let me grab. We're talking about like cakes, for instance, okay? It's a plastic container. Is this disposable? No, it's not, okay? I would not throw this out. This is something you could definitely reuse, and is meant to be reusable, okay? So what do acceptable containers look like? Okay, good question. Let me show you some examples. Anything that's like not styrofoam, aluminum, okay, plain aluminum, has a flimsy little plastic lid, that's disposable, okay? We're going to consider that disposable. Also, let me grab another example. And this is not something you would necessarily use for a youth fair entry because of how it's shaped, but I wanted to show you as an example, this is a container. I think this, I don't know what this is even left over from, but it is left over from something and it's been cleaned and can be repurposed for youth fair item entries, okay? I could put a cake on this. It's very large. I could put a cake on this and I could cover that cake with, you know, a clear wrapping. So maybe that's plastic wrap, okay? Or press and seal. And that would be acceptable to enter. Or if you have a lid that would cover your cake safely, or, you know, your cookies or whatnot, or your bread, this would work. This is not a hard plastic. It's a flimsy plastic. It's meant to be disposable, right? I saved it, but that's because I do demonstrations like this. Typically, this is something you would throw out, okay, after you use it the first time. So any kind of, you know, plastic of this nature is good. That's great for acceptable containers. Also, Ziploc bags can be used as a clear covering. So talking about, you know, let's say cookies or candies, maybe sometimes they fit really well onto a plate. That can then be put in a Ziploc baggie and it's not going to affect them any. And this is sometimes a good thing for if you have a small loaf or something that you're entering for breads. This might work as well. Or even a larger, this is a gallon size bag. So maybe a larger baggie would be better, okay? So that's acceptable. Plates, paper plate, that's disposable. Ziploc bag, disposable. You've got an acceptable container, okay? All right. No glass. So non-colored, clear plastic, cake covers. You can read through those listings there, some more detailed descriptions. Paper plates don't need to be colored. Make sure if you use them, they're plain white like this one, okay? And cardboard cake boxes are acceptable. No, I'm sorry. Not acceptable, okay, for cake categories. A lot of times people will bring in their decorated cakes in those, but that's a different situation, and we can talk about that more later, okay? Let's talk about things like cupcakes or muffins, okay? Because we don't want any added decorations, and that includes paper holders. So go for their typically plain paper ones, or the ones that look kind of like aluminum. Those would be acceptable to use there. Don't go for the pretty ones that look like flowers or cute patterns or anything. Keep it plain, okay? Judges are judging the baked good, not the presentation of it, container-wise, okay? Okay, also, one last thing to note there, in the end of that rule, it says space is limited. Containers that exceed the size of the exhibit by 3 inches per side will not be accepted. So keep that in mind. If you're turning in a regular sized cake or whatnot, you know, a platter of this size is overkill and is taking up table room, and we have limited numbers of tables, and, you know, it's just excessive. So try to make your container appropriately sized to your entry. Okay. So those are our general baked good guidelines. Any questions from you guys so far? And if not, we can move on. All right. Let's dive into our specific category rules and our judging guidelines, okay? Because when you're trying to think of what to enter and choose your recipe or, the craft or whatnot that you want to make, something to keep in mind is going to be these judging guidelines. So you know the criteria that the judges are going to be using to judge these. So candies, 9 pieces I have here on my container. I'm not, it might be backwards for you. I'm sorry if it is. Hopefully it's not. But nine pieces. 9 pieces of candy. Same for cookies. 9 pieces. And we will count them. So just make sure, if anything, bring an extra because we can take it out at check-in, okay? But make sure you've got that many. Cake or cookie balls are considered a candy. That's a question I hear a lot. Is this a candy? Is that a cookie? Cake balls are candy. Any kind of, if it's covered in chocolate and is in a ball shape, it's typically going to be a candy. And those entries are going to be judged on outside appearance, texture, level of difficulty, and flavor. If we look at our Youth Fair Judging Guidelines document, this is also available on that jclaa.net site. We have here listed, and this is going to be really important this year when our judges aren't going by taste. So they're going to be looking at texture. Appearance, is it consistent in accordance with candy type? The color of it, does it look like if it's something that's been, caramelized or cooked at all, does it look appropriate, okay? And look like it's been done correctly. The level of difficulty, this is where they're going to be looking at the recipe to see what all went into making this, okay? And taste, judges aren't going to be able to taste. They are going to be able to smell. So they can break open the candy, see what the aroma is like. Does it smell correct or off? Some things may not have a strong smell, and that's fine. But if it's appropriate for that recipe, that's another kind of element that they may be assessing as well. Okay, cookies. Once again, how many cookies? 9. 9 cookies should be included in your container, okay? Examples of cookies are things like drop cookies or bar cookies. Brownies are also categorized as a cookie, okay? And, you're not limited to those 3 kinds of cookies. There's a lot of different varieties of cookies, but those are just some common ones. And those are going to be judged on their outside appearance, their texture, level of difficulty, and flavor, okay? So some things to consider with cookies are, shape. Are they consistent in size? Are they evenly cooked? What's their texture like? Is it thin and crispy, or is it soft and chewy? Different cookie recipes, are going to bring different textures. Is that texture right for that type of cookie? So keep in mind, those are some things the judges will be looking for there. Cakes. Has to be either 1 large cake or 6 cupcakes, okay? A half dozen, okay? And that category does not include cake or cookie balls. Once again, those are going to go into candy. Okay, entries, what are they going to be judged on? For cakes, we're going to be looking at, let me get back to my correct page here. Outside appearance, okay? Is it symmetrical, free from a lot of cracks or peaks, in the cake? How does that look? Also, if it's frosted, what is the consistency of the frosting like? And how does that affect also the consistency of the cake? If it's not frosted, some cakes aren't, Is it smooth? Is it uniform? Looking at the appearance and the texture that's present there. And then also on the inside, judges are going to be cutting into these cakes. Is it moist? Is it evenly baked? Is it too dry or really heavy and stodgy? What does that look like on the inside? Color. Is the coloring uniform? Has it been burned a little bit or overbaked a little bit? Level of difficulty, looking at the recipe and considering that, typically we would say flavor, but once again, not flavor this year. But all of those other components are definitely going to be considered. Okay, that brings us to our bread category. And breads must be entered, in an acceptable container, and it needs to be one loaf or bread item that's been unsliced, or 6 muffins or 6 rolls, okay? So our cookies and our candies are in pieces of 9, sets of 9. Our cakes and our breads come in, if it's divided or it's smaller items, it's going to be 6, half a dozen, okay? Make sure you just keep that straight as you're, getting your entries ready. Breads are going to be judged on kind of similar to cakes a little bit, but there's a few different components here. So outside appearance, is it well proportioned? Is it symmetrical? How does it look, right? The crust, has it cooked evenly, been baked evenly? Does it have a lot of cracks or bulges that aren't maybe appropriate for that type of bread? The volume, is it lightweight, in proportion to size? Is it appropriate for that type of bread? How well has it been proved? Has it been underproved? Is it overproved? Those are some different things that come into play with breads, right? The texture, is it really dry? Is it, is it too soft? Is it maybe overbaked so it has a really crumbly texture or something? For bread, a lot of times when we talk about texture too, a lot of times looking at, the distribution of like the air holes and air pockets on the inside. Is that even? What does that look like? If it's underbaked, a lot of times that's going to not come out quite right. And so judges can kind of look at that and consider that as well. Level of difficulty also, once again. Flavor, not so much this year, right? But they can still get the aroma. They can cut it open, really look at the texture and those other components, okay? All right, pies. So pies must be a traditional pie, and they have to be entered in a non-decorative, round, aluminum foil pie pan, because we can't use glass. Obviously, probably not plastic, because you're not going to be baking in that. And shall be one single pie with a pastry pie crust on the bottom. An additional pie crust on the top is acceptable, okay? But it's got to have that crust on the bottom. Some recipes will sort of do the whole crustless bottom, crust on the top, and that's really more like a cobbler at that point. So make note of that. Make sure your recipe includes that, okay? The crust must be prepared from scratch. Like we talked about earlier, crust recipe must be included on the recipe sheet. Don't forget that. And it's got to include both the ingredients and the preparation steps. Entries will be judged on outside appearance, crust, filling, level of difficulty, and flavor. So if we break that down a little bit, okay, and we look at our guidelines for pies, here we go. So, outside appearance, a lot about consistency, especially crust. How does that look if you include a top crust? How well has that been executed? If you put any decorations or anything like that. The crust itself, this is top or bottom. Uniform browning, is it the right thickness? Is it nice and flaky, or is it very crumbly? Or, how does that look? And then also the filling. Is it consistent? Is it not too dry and also not underbaked to where it's really runny? Should be an appropriate consistency for that pie. Also looking at the level of difficulty, okay? There's some consistency throughout these guidelines with each of these categories, but it's important to consider them with each type of entry. Okay, last edible entry is canned goods. And canned goods also need to have a recipe. It's got to be the same situation as our other recipes. One side of 8.5 by 11 white paper, black ink, okay? Nothing decorative. It's got to include all of the ingredients, okay? And the instructions, but also it needs to include the yield. So what size jar and how many jars the recipe makes. And it should also include the canning method that was used, okay? So if you look at rule number 2, it says all canned foods must have been canned since the previous show and processed by hot water bath or pressure cooker canning method. And the recipe must include the canning method used. So make note of that. That's one that sometimes people will forget to include. We need to know that because we need to know, A, this was safely canned, going back to our whole food safety mindset. And B, it just helps the judges to know, too, kind of what they're looking at, right? So make sure that's included in your recipe. Products for canning can be bought, right? It doesn't have to come from your own garden or whatnot. But the exhibitor must have canned them, obviously. So let's talk about pectin because there's a lot of different elements that go into canning. So pectin can be used, such as commercially available, but no artificial coloring is going to be accepted because sometimes, guys, that's used to cover up some stuff that's gone wrong. And so we want our judges to be able to see exactly what's going on with that canned good. Now, we do have an exception in these rules, and that's talking about red hots because a lot of red hots or a lot of pickle recipes can include red hots, and that does sometimes affect the coloring because of the color that candy is. But we're going to allow those because they're usually kind of integral to the flavoring of those recipes. So that is an exception if that's something you really enjoy making. Don't worry, use your red hots. That's okay. So rule number 5 is one that an amendment has been made to under canned goods, and that's instead of bringing 2 pint-sized standard or wide mouth jars, this year you're just going to need to bring 1. And those should be approximately 5 inches in height and do not have decorative lids. Jars must be sealed properly. And jar lids and rings must not have rust or corrosion. 1 jar, okay, once again, this is going to be different. It can be opened, tasted by the judges, and then discarded. So that's not going to be exactly the case this year. So let's talk about real quickly what our different jars should look like. I have some different examples. Okay. So this is a really great example of like a standard lid, a non-decorative lid. It's like silver, maybe gold, okay? Plain, nothing's written on it. We will write on those lids because we're going to mark those typically. This year that might be a little different though because we're only doing 1 jar. But still, just don't have any writing, don't need their names, anything like that. No cute printing on these, no fabric coverings, just plain, right? And we have standard mouth is acceptable. Okay, this is a very plain jar. Look at that. Beautiful, plain. This is ideal. Perfect. And this is also, this has the brand name on it. We're not counting that as decorative, right? It's a type of jar, okay? This is a wide mouth compared to our standard, and that's acceptable as well. So you've got your choice, okay? Whatever works best for you there. Something that would not be acceptable, I have a jar like this one. I don't think this is even the right size as far as what it holds, but also look at that. It does have a very decorative pattern happening on the outside in the glass itself. That's a no. Okay, there's a marked difference between how this looks and how this kind of a jar looks, right? So be mindful. And I know that canning jars have been a little difficult to find this year, so best of luck. I hope that you can find some. I know there are some places that are, able to keep them in stock. So don't just grab anything off the shelf, though. Make sure that your jars are, going to be in line with the rules, okay? All right. What are we judging canned goods on? Well, I'm glad you asked. Color. So, does that look appropriate for the type of food that you've canned? Characteristic type, free from discoloration, etc. Free from imperfection. So are your pieces, if you have pieces, of anything in there, are they the same size and shape? Maybe they've been cut really nice and evenly, okay? That type of situation. Also, the pack is important. Have the jars been filled to the appropriate headspace? Because you should be, that's an important part of canning, is making sure that headspace is appropriate. And also no sediment in the bottom of jars. We don't want just stuff hanging out in the bottom that looks like it's maybe been really, really old or whatnot. And also proper proportion of solid to liquid. Do you have enough liquid in there with your, solid items? Okay. Once again, not tasting, but judges can open them up and smell the jar, smell what you canned and things to kind of get a sense of what that flavor might be like and if everything's kind of been executed correctly in there. So those are the kind of judging guidelines for canned goods. And that is our last food category. So we can run through our non-food categories a little bit more quickly. But does anyone have any questions over that? Awesome. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk about art. All art entries, starts off, this is rule number 1, must be entirely painted or drawn by hand. Mixed media work is considered a craft. So I have some examples to help us understand this rule because it's one that I get questions about from time to time. So what does that mean? So I have, this is a painting, and it is, you might consider it mixed media, okay? Because it is, you can kind of see kind of 3-dimensional elements happening here, right? It's not just one canvas that's been painted. It includes some different mixed elements. But this would be acceptable because all of the elements are still entirely painted or drawn by hand. These extra elements are paper that's been glued on, okay? But it was still painted by hand and is not, something they cut out of a magazine and glued on or something, okay? That's still the artist's work, right? So that would be appropriate. Also, this is a gallery wrap canvas. The edges are nicely finished. It's not in a frame. You could turn this in just like this, and that would be appropriate. Make sure, if you're not putting it in a frame, you finish it out well, okay? Just a tip. So an example of what might not be as appropriate. Okay, this is technically mixed media. It's a collage. This is strange. Don't ask me where I got this, okay? But these are all like clippings from a magazine that have been glued together to make a collage. It looks kind of cool, but this is not what we would consider art for our youth fair. Is this art? Yes, but not for the youth fair. Not appropriate for the youth fair, okay? Nothing's been hand-drawn. Nothing's been painted or illustrated in any way, okay? It's a mixed media. That's not what we're looking for. Okay. Art must be matted, framed, or mounted on cardboard, okay? And the use of canvas is obviously permitted, okay? So if you have a sketch that you've done, I'm so sorry, my eye's itching. If you have a sketch that you've done on sketch paper, drawing paper, put it on something. First of all, your art deserves to be displayed in a better way than just being a piece of paper lying on the table there. So it doesn't mean that you have to invest in a lot of stuff, okay? You don't have to buy some big frame for it or anything like that, but just at least mount it on something so that it can be, you know, handled a little more easily and be just displayed a little bit more nicely, okay? Let's say you want to frame it. It doesn't have to be a huge frame. Here's a piece of art. I'm not sure which, it goes this direction. Okay, this is a pretty simple frame. Nothing too fancy, but it just kind of gives it a little bit of extra. And that's okay. Art, you know, can be framed. It can be matted. So use that to your advantage however you like. My suggestion is to make sure it complements your art and doesn't take away from it, though. Okay? You don't want it to be a distraction from what you've created. You want it to be a compliment. Yeah. Okay. Entries must be original, not paint by number. Should go without saying, but make sure it's original, okay? Extra props if you came up with the idea yourself as well. It's easy to go and find something on, you know, Pinterest or somewhere and just copy it identically. Get a little creative, put your own twist on it. It's okay to be inspired by something, but just try and keep things original, okay? If you want to sign your art, that is okay. We just will need to make sure that we get that covered when it's submitted at check-in, okay? Because we want to make sure that's covered before our judges see it. So I understand if you want to go ahead and sign your art, that's okay. Or you can wait and sign it after it's been judged. You'll get the chance to do that too. So that's up to you, but got to have that signature covered, okay? And it's best if you can go ahead and do that ahead of time. Post-it note or, you know, piece of paper or however you can do that. But cover that signature. Entries are going to be judged on time and effort involved, the quality of work, creativity, and good use of materials, okay? Those are the criteria that we're looking for. Here we go. That's it. It's very vague, but it gives something for the judges to go off of when they're looking at those different types of art. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're creating it as well. Crafts. Okay, so we talked about recipes for our food entry items. Craft has a recipe too, if you will, and it's really the instructions that must come with the craft, okay? And those should look a lot like our recipes. So typed in black ink on one side of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that's plain and white. No pictures, no cutesy stuff, no nothing, okay? So that should detail what you did to make your craft, start to finish, okay? Entries should include only items made by the exhibitor. No accessory items allowed. If you make jewelry and you want to display that on a stand, you need to make a jewelry stand, okay? If you made something that has to be propped up or anything, you need to make something to submit with it to prop it up, okay? Because it's just not, I mean, and that's part of why we have the instructions as well, is so judges can see what you've really made from scratch with your craft and what you haven't. But just make note of that rule. That's one that sometimes people can forget about pretty easily. Everything needs to be, items that have been made by you. Entries are going to be judged on time and effort involved, which they're going to be able to see just by looking at your craft, but also by looking at your instructions, okay? Quality of work, the level of difficulty, the creativity, and good use of materials, okay? And the judges are actually going to use a rubric. And so you can even go and look at that if you really want to and see kind of how that breaks down point-wise. So those are the criteria for the craft category. Okay. Creative stitchery. Entries will be judged on time and effort involved, level of difficulty, quality of work, creativity of design, and good use of material. Very similar to our craft. I don't have a whole lot to add here. Some examples of creative stitchery, sorry, getting a little tongue-tied, are things like cross stitch, embroidery, knit, crochet, quilts. It's typically items that are sewn or, created using some type of stitching technique that aren't going to be worn necessarily so much. But, that list is not, entries aren't limited to that list of examples that are given in the rules, but those are just some ideas. Comparatively, if we look at our clothing category, these entries must be a sewn article of clothing and be made from scratch by the exhibitor. And we say made from scratch because we don't want entries such as, there's like one trend is taking a men's dress shirt and altering it into like a dress, okay? We want to see you making a dress from scratch and not just taking what somebody else has sewn and created and just restructuring it to into another type of garment. We want to see you constructing, a wearable article of clothing from start to finish, basically. Keep in mind, clothing articles, they're not auctioned. You get prize money for those. For grand champions, it's $100, and for reserve champions, it's $75. So, and that's listed in the rules. Keep that in mind. Items are going to be judged on general appearance, cutting and matching of material, the seaming, how well that's been executed, garment details, closures, hems, and level of difficulty. Okay, so keep those in mind when you're constructing your garment, choosing your patterns. That's what the judges are going to be looking for. Photography is another really popular category, and all of our photographs must be 8 by 10 inches, okay? We have size is one thing we run into issues with from time to time, and if you're not familiar with an 8 by 10, this is roughly an 8x10 photograph, okay? Also, color and black and white are acceptable, okay? So either will do. You've got choices there. All prints must be permanently mounted on stiff foam or mounting board, no larger than 8x10 and no thicker than 1/4 inch thick. So I have this one, this is my example image, and it has been mounted, okay? And this is on mounting board, okay? Kind of like a really stiff cardboard. Foam board is also appropriate, but just keep in mind that thickness. You can't just use any type of foam. But as long as you're under that 1/4 inch, you're fine, okay? And it needs to be cut to fit the dimensions of your photograph, okay? So no poster boards, fun foam, or other flimsy craft material is acceptable as a mounting material. Yeah, okay. Slide computer enhanced photos, and this is something that changed, I think, just last year. We do allow computer enhancements, such as cropping, trimming, adjusting lighting, and even red eye reduction. But things that are really substantially altered, like really changing your colors drastically or applying design styles. You put the head of an eagle on the body of a lion, that kind of thing, using computer graphics, or just general kind of what we would consider photoshopping, is not allowed, right? Because we're trying to keep this streamlined, and there kind of can reach a certain point in photography editing where it's like, is this photography that I'm judging, or is this an art form that I'm judging? And I'm not saying photography by itself isn't art, but something can become artistic, and it really can be difficult then for our judges to do good comparison at that point. So keep that in mind. A little bit of enhancement is okay. We understand that we live in the digital age of, having photo editing available right on your phone even. So if you need to alter the brightness or the contrast or your saturation a little bit, okay. But don't get crazy. Okay. Last thing, one other thing that's really major with photography entries is they need to be submitted in a gallon size, clear, sealable bag. So I have an example here. Ziploc baggie, gallon size, okay? Not bigger, and obviously not smaller where we can't close it up. But this is just to help protect the photo. We want it to be clear so judges can see it well, okay? And so this needs to come with your entry. Okay, have it in it, ready to go. Mounted on your mounting board or foam board and in your Ziploc baggie, and you're ready to rock and roll, okay, with your photography entry. So also no names. I wouldn't include the date either on your camera. If you still have one that's going to put that, it's fine if you do, but sometimes we'll get them with dates that are from like the wrong year and stuff, and that just doesn't look great. So don't include anything like that on your images. Entries are going to be judged on technical merit, things like the focus, the sharpness, detail, depth of field, color, brightness, contrast, saturation, usage of light. Okay. Also composition, talking about the framing, right? Does the photo clearly communicate the subject? Is the photo balanced? Does the photographer exhibit creativity through the photo? What angles are, being shot at? Things of that nature. And then impact. The viewer's initial response to a stimulating image doesn't have the wow factor, okay? Keep that in mind. If there's not any questions over those categories, we can move on to our last but not least, decorated cakes. So decorated cake items, once again, they're not auctioned. They receive prize money. That's $100 for Grand Champion, $75 for Reserve. And decorated cakes aren't cut into, so they're never tasted, and they're not going to be tasted this year, obviously. We're not cutting into them because we're really focusing on the decoration here. However, the cake itself and all visible portions of the entry, including decorations and display accessories, should be edible. Okay? And made by the exhibitor, and that includes fondant. Now then, a cake tester may be inserted into the cake to ensure compliance with rules. We say that because, you know, we understand that there's some components of decorated cakes where they need like special supports and whatnot inside to help stabilize them, that, you know, you might not be able to make edible. But we still want there to be real cake under there. We want our kiddos to be experiencing making a decorated cake from start to finish. And for any baker, that's going to include, and any professional baker or decorator, that's going to include making the base cake, okay, and then also doing the decoration. So we want there to be real cake in there. Even though we're not cutting it open, we want that, you know, to be constructed from cake, and not other materials, okay? So anything that's visible, we want it to be edible, okay? No recipe is required for decorated cakes. We just want to see what you can do. Make it awesome. Those cakes are going to be judged on the level of difficulty, creativity, and good use of material, and also wow factor, okay? So keep those in mind as you're making your cake and creating your design, okay? So all of the things we just covered come from 2 documents that are available online to you to read through. And that is our special rules, our general rules and guidelines, okay, document, and then also our youth fair judging guidelines document. So where do you go to find these? You want to print it off? You want to highlight it? Maybe not. But if you want to read it, you can go to jclaa.net. It's going to be under the show rules and information tab at the top, and you'll find youth fair rules, okay? And all of these documents are available there. jclaa.net, show rules and information, youth fair rules, okay? Making sure I didn't miss anything, but I don't think that I have. Hopefully, we covered everything that you guys were needing to learn about, or wanted to know more about. Any questions before we close out here? Okay, I don't see anything. Remember that if you do come up with some questions along the way as you're getting your entries figured out, coming up with your recipes or ideas, let me know. If you have a question, you can contact either me or Miss Jill House. My information, you can always email me at keely.mccrady@ag.tamu.edu. So that's KEELY.MCCRADY@ag.tamu.edu. Shoot me an email, give me a call at my office. I would love to help you out and answer any questions you have. And if I don't know the answer, I can definitely get with Miss Jill and we'll figure out what you need to know. Okay. So best of luck to you guys. I'm so looking forward to Youth Fair 2021. It's always a fun start to the year. And yeah, I'm here to help you. If I can be a resource to you in any way, let me know. And I would love to help. So take care. I hope you have a great evening. And once again, this video is going to be available for viewing once we're done here. And feel free to share that or use it as a resource, okay? All right. Well, thank you guys very much. And I'll see you at Youth Fair. Bye-bye.